and they're on their way here. So what I'm going to do, and he's going to look for it quickly. It's on its way from the campus. What I'm going to do, can you hear me? Yes. I'm going to do the introduction now so that they can start as soon as the mic appears. But you're going to have to help me because they are desperately nervous. And I've tried to tell them there's one other person who was so hysterical that I didn't know nothing I said to her. And she thought that I ordered up and she was hysterical. And please don't be nervous. So I'm going to start just before she leaves with Kate Brown. And just to say to you, these two came to see me, and together they are the most fantastic combination of people you can find. And I know that they're wonderful. So let me just tell you a bit about Kate. Kate is a financial planner with a special interest in helping individuals, couples, and their families navigate the transformations which life brings, particularly those that take place at retirement and in later life. Kate coordinated and lectured in the Living Longer, Living Well course, which followed the Summit in 2014. She feels qualified to co-present by Alison by virtue of the many years of experience of listening to clients as they face and manage life transitions. She was a student of Mary Ainworth, whose life gave her the opportunity to observe first and reflect on how to live well until you are nearly 103. And I say it was. It was Kate's mother-in-law who lived with them. And she just died just short of 100. Wow. 103.5. How's that? So, having worked in senior wellness, Alison Benzimra developed a compelling interest in healthy aging and the dynamics of aging populations. How do we rise to the challenges with imagination, enhancing quality of life for all concerned? Alison recently completed her master's at the UCT Business School with her research focused on breaking down the barriers between the health and finance sectors. She identified the urgent need to develop models which promote physical, social, and financial well-being in later life. Alison is a writer, presenter, and consultant to organizations affected by the consequences of people living longer, healthier lives, and is a research fellow at the Samson Institute for Aging Research. I think what we must do is if you can start so long, and he will bring the mic as soon as it arrives.
Okay.
Okay?
Madi, before you go...
You've got me. You're mic'd.
I'm mic'd. Can you hear me? Is it a bit loud?
That's fine.
Okay. I thought you would find this interesting. A study found that 60% of older adults experience higher levels of happiness in retirement. So UCT Summer School statistically has the happiest student body of all lecture programs.
I can vouch for that.
And thank you to all of you for joining our conversation today. We believe that the high turnout reflects how aging has become increasingly topical. Over the years, Kate and I have enjoyed many cups of coffee, discussing our shared interest and curiosity about all things relating to aging well. And that is what I love about working in the aging sector. I can have conversations with people across race, gender, religious, and socioeconomic circumstances. Because the reality is, whether it's your own aging process or that of a family member, aging impacts us all. It's okay. And you know, that's the point. Aging has an impact on so many levels. On a macro level, societies around the world are grappling with growing aging populations. But on a micro level, aging is such a personal and unique experience that we're having to deal with in an ever-changing world. So just to give you an outline of how we'll be taking our conversation today, I'll be talking about the notions of aging. And then I'll bring Kate in to share her valuable insight, both professional and personal experience. But I'd like to begin with a story. And this story is about a young woman. You see, she has a dilemma because she's in love with two men, and both have proposed. One is a businessman, and the other an antiques dealer. Confused, she seeks the advice of her wise grandmother, who listens and says with certainty, "My dear, marry the antiques dealer. At least you know the older you get, the more he'll value you." And what I love about that story is it just illustrates the value of aging. Why is it that words like retro and classic are desirable, but they don't necessarily apply to us? What value have you placed on your aging? And what value has society placed on aging? So it's not that modernization has necessarily demoted the elderly. It's actually demoted the family. Modern society has given us more liberty and more control over our own lives. But in doing so, it's also given us liberty to be less beholden on other generations. And it's not that the veneration of elders has been replaced by the veneration of youth. It's rather that the veneration of the independent self has replaced the veneration of elders. And no more does the independent self come to the fore than in the midlife crisis. Midlife crisis was first coined in 1965. When midlife could be deemed between the ages of 40 and 60. But it's not that our lives have necessarily extended at the end, but rather expanded in the middle. With modern medicine and a better understanding of diet and exercise, midlife can be anywhere from 35 to 75 years old now. And with that, this expansion of the midlife, it has kind of aggravated our ability to identify with our future older selves. We still don't have a mic for you.
I have a very loud voice. No. Shall we try without?
Have they?
No, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear?
They're nodding at the back.
Okay.
Now, Alison, I'm going to have my say now. Many of us here today might be regarded already. You can't hear me. Okay.
So,
do you want to give me your mic?
I think what Kate's trying to say, and this is maybe one of the reasons why when we decided to do this conversation to UCT Summer School, is that so many of us in the audience, more so than me, are already at their future older selves. So I suppose that poses the question of how do you have this notion of identifying with your future older self if you're already considered to be old? Yeah?
Or how do you get a young person to identify with their future older self?
Exactly. Yeah, we can. It's just on my...
It's you now.
Okay. So in terms of a future older self, behavioral economists would term this as our present self's willingness or ability to adjust our desires and habits for the likely needs of our future older self. So when we're thinking of identifying with our future older self, there's almost two issues here. The first issue is that as generations, we have remained isolated. So we share boundaries, but we don't necessarily share trust. And this separation happens along the life course. So in our school years, in the workplace, retirement villages, it kind of creates a them and us scenario. And this scenario perpetuates ageism. So ageism is the most prolific form of discrimination, and because it crosses race and gender boundaries. But there's also another issue to contend with here with regards to identifying with our future older selves. And this is this notion of psychological distancing. So if you could visualize a landscape painting, our brains can see which is in the foreground and which is in the background. The house in the landscape painting in the foreground has precise, bold, and detailed brushstrokes, whereas the hillsides and the clouds in the background, the brushstrokes are blurred and sweeping and faint. And this technique plays a trick on our brain. But unfortunately, our brains also play the trick of this with regards to identifying our future older selves. A study that illustrated this used university participants, where half of the participants engaged with a virtual reality avatar of their future 65-year-old self.
Can you share
Yeah, we'll share it.
in the back room did God has watched.
Okay. Thanks, Midi. Don't worry. So in the test results of this study, the participants who had engaged with their future older selves allocated more money towards their retirement savings than those that had not had that experience. So to use that as an example, I pose to you, what decisions would you make today if you engaged with your future 100-year-old self?
Isn't this one of the most significant developments of the late 20th and now 21st century, the marked increase in life expectancy? In our financial planning work, we help clients plan for a life expectancy to age 100.
Well, Kate, that's a very sensible thing to do, considering our conversation today. The third act is a term which describes how we could be living a whole other adult lifetime beyond the official age of retirement. But let us touch on this notion of retirement. Retirement with a pension was first conceived in 1883 by Otto von Bismarck. At that stage, the average person lived 1.2 years in retirement. Nowadays, we could be living 20 plus years in retirement. And I think it's important to note that increased longevity without quality of life is an empty prize. So living well is more desirable than necessarily simply living to a very old age. And that means maximizing the number of years you live in good health and compressing the number of years lived with disability and avoidable dependency. With increasing life expenses, healthcare expenses in later life, an investment in health is an essential element of emotional and financial well-being. But, and Kate, I think this is where the complexity of aging comes in, remaining in good health in your later years has consequences. For example, the Association of American Retired People published a report that stated if you are currently 65 years old and in good health, there's a 70% chance that you will require long-term care towards the end of your life. In the UK, the average period of frailty or dependency is 2 years and 9 months. And the other consequence of having lived a fuller, longer life is that you risk outliving your financial resources. So, Kate, I've painted the... Very mic issues. Better? Only all of a sudden.
It's happening from the mic outside.
Yeah.
So we carry
I think it's our second mic that's creating an issue. So Kate, I've obviously painted the realities of aging. Given your experience, what are some of the things that people could attend to in order to age well?
I think the first and the most important is to attend to one's own emotional well-being. It falls to each of us each day to hone ourselves a little bit. And it's important to slay your demons. Your aim is to be able to be fully present for yourself and for others, to be at ease, and not to be unduly dependent on external factors for feelings of well-being. The second thing is to take care of your physical well-being in order to be able to enjoy this expanded period of middle life, to be able to move, to see, and to hear, if necessary with the assistance of aids. Alison will talk more about health later. Relationships are very important, whether they are with the family, with friends, if they're still alive, your community, and with one's team of professionals, everybody from your physician to the plumber, via the hairdresser and the librarian and all these people who play a part in your quality of life. I'd particularly like to dwell on the carer-caree relationship, whether this is between family members or involves an employer-employee relationship. This can and should be a mutually respectful and beneficial arrangement. As an older person needing care, don't worry about being a nuisance. You're a wonderful job creation project, and boy, do we need jobs in South Africa. With regard to housing and amenities, it's important to adapt your environment to enable independent living for as long as you wish it or can manage it, and ease of care when the time comes. Now we come to financial well-being. The choices you make today affect the choices available to you later. When you're young, developing a financial plan is generally an exercise in looking forward. So you're thinking about maybe buying a property, possibly starting a family, going to replace your car, go on holidays, and we hope possibly do something for saving for your retirement. But that's usually the one that most people leave out. But then there's a tipping point. And as an older person developing a financial plan, instead of looking forward, you actually start at the end and work backwards. You ask, how do I want to finish? And that will include asking, what sort of care do I want to be able to afford?
You got one. So Kate, how do you... Is it working?
Just use this. Turn it off and use this.
Okay. It is on. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So Kate, how do you help your clients face the possibility...
No, forget it. Just use this.
So Kate, how do you help your clients face the possibility of frailty, which may include incontinence and dementia, and then how do you help them plan for this?
Simply, we do it through the financial planning process. So let's imagine that you're a client. We start by asking you to tell us your story. Acknowledging your reality and being able to share it is vital. Being clear about what resources you have available, not just financial resources. We include family and friendships and other assets which are not necessarily financial assets. We give you the opportunity to articulate your aspirations, your aims, and your intentions. And in doing this, most importantly, to clarify your priorities. Sometimes this is the first time couples have really been able to talk about money matters. I have had the experience of a couple going through a long meeting, and at some point the wife goes to the loo, and the husband turns to me and says, "Oh, I'm so glad you told her that. I've been trying to tell her that for years." And shortly afterwards, his prostate gets the better of him and he goes off to the loo. And she says, "I'm so glad you said that to him. He's never listened to me when I've told him that." So there's merit in the planning process for marital harmony. Anyway, and we encourage people to have the conversations they need to have within themselves, with us as planners, and with those around them who are affected by the decisions you make and your own collection of attitudes. Reframing your understanding of your position with a positive attitude can lead to a better quality of life. We ask you to contemplate the level of care you would like to be able to afford. And we're then able to show you the implications this has for the decisions you make today about a lifestyle that is affordable and sustainable and allows you to live out your aspirations so that you can live as well as you can as long as you live. And that's what it says on the third board. Facing the possibility of frailty, using this approach, rather than simply fearing what may happen, is much more constructive. You tell your story, and in sharing your reality with another human being, almost magically, you become better able to deal with life's most difficult challenges.
Kate, on the subject of care, in what ways can care be provided?
The choices are obviously constrained by your financial and your family and other resources. At one end of the spectrum, the high-cost, high-care option, just the care alone can cost over $40,000 a month. So if you imagine that you need $40,000 a month for care, and you need probably another 10 for your medical aid contribution, and the medical expenses medical aid doesn't cover, and you have certain other expenses, you get your hair cut, you buy the odd book, you watch videos, you subscribe to DSTV or whatever it is you do, you're talking about needing 50,000 a month. That's 600,000 Rand a year, and if you need that for 5 years, it's 3 million Rand. Most people can't afford that. So, at the other end of the spectrum, care may be provided by the family. This is obviously what happens in most poorer communities, but it's what happens in many communities, in fact. So this is where we come back to what we talked about in the description of the conversation. There needs to be family planning again. And the best financial plan, I had a funny experience. A few weeks ago, I was invited to a dinner party, and I found myself sitting beside a very experienced fund manager, and he knows that I'm a financial planner. And as I sat down beside him, he guffawed and said, "Ha ha!" He says, "The best financial plan is a family." To which I replied, "A functioning family." Then, of course, there's the hybrid model, which is a mixture of paid care and family care. And this is the model that we used as we cared for my mother-in-law. And we were very fortunate that our house was like a village. There were lots of people around. We had paid care for part of the day, 6 days a week, and the family covered the rest of the day, Sundays, public holidays, and then, as I realized with shock, one 17th of December, when the carer goes on leave. Anyway, when you're organizing family care, frankness, clarity, and communication will help families manage better. There are a number of things that I would encourage you to be clear about if you're having to organise care within a family. Who can do what, and who can make what contribution, and for how long? Be aware of the distinction between somebody who does caring and the person who is responsible for seeing that all the caring is done. The person who does the managing may or may not also do the caring. My own experience was that I did the managing and I also did some of the caring. The very important thing that I learned from our experience was that whatever role anyone is playing in this caring process, it's vital that they be able to do it with a good grace. Because it's not good for the person who's doing the caring if they're grumpy and resentful or feeling abused. And it's not good for the person being cared for if the person looking after them is grumpy and angry and disappointed and cross and all of these things. Sometimes a burden of care falls unduly on one person, and this is very difficult to manage. If someone is looking after an ill and dying spouse, it is terribly important, if you possibly can, to avoid burnout. Burnout is very difficult to come back from. But imagine nursing a dying spouse and becoming absolutely exhausted, as I have seen people become. You need a lot of energy to grieve, and you enter that process often virtually bereft of energy. So if you know anybody who's in that position, who's nearing burnout, please be kind, do anything you can to support and help them.
Kate, there was some knowing laughter when you talked about a functioning family. I think we can all relate to that. But on that note, what are your thoughts in situations where either the person wishes not to be a burden on their family, or their adult children live far away, or they have no family? What are your thoughts in these situations?
The first obvious responses are retirement villages and old age homes. These solve some very important problems for a lot of people, most particularly security, avoiding isolation, because these people are living in a community where there may be some organised activities and so on. Often there is transport provided to local amenities on a regular basis. Care services on an ad hoc or a full-time or part-time basis may be available. But these communities or these arrangements also create other problems. A retirement village and an old age home is a uni-generational community. All older people, there's always somebody dying, and there's always somebody who's just died, and this is very hard to bear. This is not for sissies. Many of these communities do not allow people to have pets, yet it is well documented. There is a mountain of research that shows that people who want a pet, being able to have a pet, is enormously beneficial for their physical and emotional well-being. There's another issue which I haven't heard people speak much about, and that is when you move into a community, you sign a document that says, yes, I'll obey the rules. But who made the rules, and for whose benefit and convenience? I attend some of the sessions of the South African Care Forum in Cape Town, and I encountered a very nice woman who is a manager in a care home in the northern suburbs. And she put her hand up at one point and she said, we have to remember we are working in these people's homes. They're not living in our office. And I think that when the rules are looked at through that prism, not the prism of the convenience for the bureaucracy, for the management, you will find that communities will change quite a lot of what goes on in them. But the point is, if you want to change the rules, how do you do it? It's a big ask. It's a big thing to try and get those rules changed. So if you're young and vigorous and have lots of good business experience and management experience, maybe that's your mission as you move into whatever retirement village it is. So there's another aspect that I've noticed, is that quite often there are very limiting design flaws in these facilities. I visited someone in a frail care recently, where in order to make room for the wheelchair in her room, the bed had to be put so that she couldn't lie in bed and look out the window. I'm not sure that the view from the window was very edifying. I think it was of the wall of the building next door. And she basically looked at the cupboard and the door. And sometimes somebody went past the door. Now, if you're going to be in a small room as a frail person, that is not exactly a nourishing environment to be spending the day in. There is a movement in the United States and to some extent in the UK called the co-housing movement. And one of the things that Alison and I have cobbled together is a very rudimentary resource list. And on that resource list, which we can email you if we have your email address, and I've got a couple of copies you can look at as well, is the name of someone in Cape Town who's researched this and who's trying to get something going in this regard. His name is Alan Ralphs, and you'll find his contact details in the resource list. Alison asked me about being a burden to one's children. And I want to say that just because you need your children, you're not necessarily a burden to them. And I will describe my own experience of this. My mother-in-law moved in with us when she was 92. She lived on and on and on, and occasionally we wondered, not when Granny dies, but if Granny dies. And just before her 100th birthday, I bumped into a friend and I said very jokingly, I said, because you know old age gets like childhood again. I said, it's just 3 more sleeps till Granny's 100. She said, you mean 3 more wake-ups? But just before I got up to speak at her funeral, it suddenly hit me like a bullet between the eyes that in needing our help, in us caring for her, she had brought enormous meaning and purpose, not only to my life, but the life of everyone who came to our house and everyone who helped her. So I want to make a plea to you that if you do have children, don't deny them the opportunity, or your grandchildren, don't deny them the opportunity to play a meaningful role in your life. Now, Alison, health is a major consideration. Could you please tell us about some of the things you can do to increase your chances of aging well?
So, Kate, I think it's important to acknowledge that as we get older, it's not just about health per se, but it's health and well-being. So healthy aging is a comprehensive approach that has a focus on prevention and maintaining independence. And even for those living with a chronic condition or having already experienced a decline in capacity, there's areas that you can focus on. And in terms of healthy aging, there's numerous things in terms of mindfulness and nutrition, things like that. But just the areas that I'll be focusing on today is physical activity, social engagement, and maintaining a sense of purpose. So with regards to physical activity, remaining active is vital. 2 things to focus on. The first is avoiding a fall. And remember, the most important fall to avoid is your first one. So that means attending to your posture and your gait and maintaining your strength and balance. But in terms of your home, making sure that your home is clear of clutter and any trip hazards. So for example, curled up rugs on the floor. And then an essential aspect of a fall prevention plan is reviewing your medication. So making sure that you're not over-medicated and that the benefit of one drug is not confounding the benefits of another. Another area with regards to physical activity is maintaining your strength and your muscle mass. So sarcopenia is a term which is the natural decline in muscle mass, and this happens from our late 30s, but it increases the older we get. So maintaining your strength not only enables independent living, but it's also shown to improve your cognitive health. The other essential aspect of healthy aging is social engagement. Isolation and depression is as detrimental to one's health as smoking and obesity. And I was very interested to see that the UK has now created a ministry of loneliness, that they have realized that it's so detrimental to the public health of their citizens. And then the third area in terms of healthy aging is self-development. So this means maintaining a sense of purpose and meaning. And needless to say, I do not need to talk about the benefits of lifelong learning to you, because this is why you're all here, but it is an essential aspect of aging well, so well done. Kate, can you share any of your ideas that your clients have found helpful?
Yes, if I can just start with this motif here. This is what we call the fiscal flower. We use this in our company because it guides us in our work with clients, and it guides us in our working relationships with each other. And one day I hope to be able to practice it at home as well. The 3 petals of the flower stand for listen, care, enable. And coming up through the stem is imagination. I think that very often a lot of things are done with insufficient imagination. And the imagine nourishes the flower, and at the heart of the flower is the golden rule. Do as you would be done by, do not do unto others that you wouldn't want them to do to you. So that's just a useful, we don't do this with all our clients, but when I've described this to clients, they invariably sit and draw it and say, I must tell my daughter about that. So the second one is what I call circles of care. Now, in this one, this is particularly helpful where there's a crisis. So let's say, for example, somebody is in hospital, they've been diagnosed with a very serious condition, and it's very touch and go. And this person is in the center of the circle of care. In the immediate circle around them will be their spouse and their children and possibly parents if they're still alive. And then there'll be friends, colleagues, employees in the outer circles. And the rule is that if you're in this circle, you're the person in the target, you can say anything you like to anybody, which we call dump out. So if they're terrified of dying, they can say that. But if I am that person's friend here, I am not allowed to say, I am terrified of you dying. If I'm going to say, I'm terrified of you dying, I have to dump out to somebody further away from my friend. And all that can go in is comfort. So the rule is how not to say the wrong thing, comfort in, dump out. And on the resource list, there's a link to a very good article about this, which was published in the Los Angeles Times some year ago, and it's called How Not to Say the Wrong Thing. And it's really helpful. I have shared this because I've had the experience with my daughter and young people I know where children of school age have been diagnosed with terminal illnesses. And this concept has been shared in the school community, and it's been really helpful for a lot of people. Now, I also have a story, a situation that arises often. If you imagine we've got Mrs. So-and-so living in Claremont, and her daughter's living in Rondebosch, and she's very busy, but can we give her a name? Can we vote for a name? What will we call her? Mrs. Claremont. We'll call her Mrs. Claremont. So Mrs. Claremont is getting a bit old and frail. She's got a part-time carer, but the carer doesn't drive, and so the daughter does all the medical appointments, takes her to the hairdresser, does the chiropodist, does the hearing aids, all of this kind of thing. And it's a bit of a push to do all of this because she's also busy. She's got her family of her own. And this woman, Mrs. Claremont, also has a son, but he lives on another continent. And he feels a bit guilty because he's not really doing anything to help. So he comes to visit. And what does he do to help his mother? He immediately tells his sister how to do what she's doing better. Wrong. There was no comfort in, there was a lot of well-intentioned but very inappropriate dumping in. So as soon as you have a conversation with a family and say, your brother doesn't mean to offend you, what he's really trying to do is help his mother. He's just got it wrong. And so we would suggest to the brother, if you want to help your sister, first of all, when you arrive, you say, thank you so much for everything you do for our mother. Completely different response from sister. The second thing is, when he's far away, he can send an email to his sister to say, how is mum? Are you having a hard time? Is she still being difficult about X? Or are you managing? Is there enough money? Do you need me to send you $500 a month or whatever it is? That is really helpful, and that will allow the relationship between brother and sister to flourish in a constructive way, and lo and behold, the sister will be better able to sustain her efforts to help her mother. So, anyway, quality of life is more governed by your attitude to what happens in your life than what actually happens. And attitude and gratitude are two of the most important non-financial assets in the business of aging. I'd like to share you something from caring, my experience of caring for my mother-in-law. And it's very much on the lines of the story I've just told you. People were often kind to me and said it was awfully good of me to help look after my mother-in-law. And I have to admit that when people said that to me, it was very nourishing, and it really helped me to keep going, and I was grateful for that. But I was also 100% clear that it was my mother-in-law herself who made her good care possible. And there were three things that I noticed particularly. The first one was she obeyed the first 10 rules of being a mother-in-law. Rule 1, thou shalt not interfere. Rule 2, thou shalt not interfere. All together now. Rule 3, thou shalt not interfere. Thank you. You've got it. you know what 7, 8, and 9 are as well. The second thing was that although she needed to be helped, she didn't demand help. She didn't demand things. And the consequence of that was that everybody did what they did gladly. It intrigued me, because I'm terribly demanding, and I've really got to learn this from her. The final lesson, which I think is very, very interesting, is that she received the help we gave her in uncomplicated ways. It's the only way I've been able to try and describe it. And I think that what we need to understand is that I spoke earlier about how by being able to give her help, we felt better about ourselves. You haven't given successfully if somebody hasn't been able to receive. So I think the honing that we do of ourselves maybe should be, some of it should be in the direction of learning to receive as well as to be able to give. Giving for most people is easier than receiving. And she was a brilliant receiver. 5 years ago, as Madi mentioned, I gave a lecture on living longer, living well. And part of my theme in that lecture was that 2 things that you need to age well, or live as well as you can as long as you live, the 2 themes were courage and kindness. And I stand by the conclusion that I came to at the end of that lecture. And that is, courage is a great asset. It's very important. But in the end, only kindness matters. Thank you very much. We are happy to take questions and have discussions now. Anybody have a question? Yes. You can live on your own as long as you want to. But at some point, if you're getting into difficulties, if you're falling a lot, you shouldn't be falling a lot. At most, you should fall once, because then you should take corrective action. If you're physically well, you can go on living. One of the links we've got in our resource list is a clip of an English woman she actually played Test cricket for England at one stage. And she's 107, and she's thinking of taking up martial arts. And she still drives her car. I'm not sure that Prince Philip will be driving his car for much longer. I saw a nice cartoon the other day of a picture of Theresa May shaking hands with the Queen. And the Queen says, "Well, you've made a right royal mess of this. Would you like Philip to drive you home?" So the answer is it depends. Some people can live to be very old, some people can't.
In terms of care, there's activities of daily living. So there's certain things that you can do. Get dressed, feed yourself, clean your house. But as your activities of daily living may be compromised, I don't necessarily think that means that you need to move out of your home. Research has shown that aging in place has huge benefits for you. You remain in your community, you have intergenerational relationships. So you can get care and assistance. Just because you can't get up on a ladder and change a light bulb anymore doesn't mean that you can't find people to help you do that. And that's where your relationships become so important, to make sure that you're getting the support that you need in order to age well in your own home. So she asked, if you're wanting to stay in your own home until your advanced old age, what services are available? Is that correct? So what I'm really interested in terms of my research is innovation within the aging sector. And what I find fascinating is that the fastest growing population in the world is the over 65s. The second fastest growing population is the over 80s. This is a billion large segment. They need services and support. So it's a great opportunity for businesses to provide this. Obviously, in countries where they have older populations, these things are more in place, but there is a growing trend towards providing those services. So care agencies that not only provide care, but also companions, but also creating a continuum of care where you can kind of slot in the care that you need. But again, it goes back to making sure that someone's keeping an eye on the circumstances, because often you don't realize that things are starting to fall apart when you're in the situation.
The most fundamental thing is a daily call to make sure that things are still right. I lived in Australia for a long time, and there with the local municipal officers, they will call you every day if you say.
And that's what I find interesting in developing societies, such as South Africa, where we don't have sufficient social security. South Africa doesn't have that, so it has to come from private-public partnerships in creating that. And I know that when I spoke to a woman from a medical aid, and they were working with their elderly members, one of the questions was how many people can you phone, but more importantly, how many people phone you?
Dr. Leon Geffen did a whole research program and ran, I think, for 2 years, Gogos with cell phones, who worked in the township. They were given cell phones, trained how to use them, and they contacted elderly people in the township and made sure that they'd taken their medication, visited them once a week, and so on. He's looking for funding to get the program going again. But